Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day. Microphone check, 1, 2. XCC, hello and welcome. XCC, hello and welcome.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. There we go, rolling. Hello and welcome to The Documentary Life, a show that sets out to inspire and inform you on how to best live and lead your own documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 27. And it is brought to you by Barong Films, proud creators of documentary film, the Documentary Life podcast, and the Documentary Academy, our industry-changing A to Z documentary filmmaking program that will transform you into the documentary filmmaker that you've always wanted to be. Find out more at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. Super excited to have you with me for today's podcast, maybe even just ever so slightly more than other times, if that's possible, of course, because we're going to be doing something a little bit different for this one. If you've been listening to TDL for a while now, you might remember a conversation back in late September of 2016 that I had with fellow documentary filmmaker and founder-curator of the well-known online documentary filmmaking resource, Desktop Documentaries. Her name is Faith Fuller. And for anyone newer to the show, or if you didn't get a chance to listen to it the first time around, I'd highly recommend going back into the TDL archives. Simply go to thedocumentarylife.com, the website, and listen to episode number 11. That particular episode was wildly popular. I received what was up to that point the most letters and amount of feedback that I'd ever received. And the downloads for my show with Faith nearly doubled my listenership back then. It makes sense. Whether with my podcast or her website, we both strive to inspire, educate, motivate, and really network a community of like-minded people, all who want the same thing that we do, which is to live out our passions of documentary filmmaking. Now, due to the popularity of the show, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that also in part because I personally enjoyed the conversation very much, I'm bringing Faith back on the program, only this time in a slightly different capacity. This time out, Faith is going to be the host for the Documentary Life. She's going to be interviewing me, the man formerly known as the host of TDL, at least for today's show. In full disclosure, I did request that we talk about a couple of specific things because I too wanted to make sure that, that we didn't repeat too many things that if you have been listening to the show for a while, you'd already know. But other than a few items, I've given Faith carte blanche to basically have at it. I do really think that you're going to enjoy this. Like I said, it's a bit different, sure, but it's good to mix things up every once in a while, right? Keeps us all on our toes, including apparently yours truly. So here, my friends, here's how it all went down.
I'm Faith Fuller, and welcome to the Documentary Life podcast. It is my privilege and honor to introduce Chris Parkhurst, documentary filmmaker, father, husband, and founder of the Documentary Life podcast. So thank you. This is super cool, and I have to make a confession.
Please.
I much prefer asking the questions rather than being on the other end. So I am
Oh boy.
so excited to interview you today, and
And I am
thank
scared to
thank
death.
you.
Thank you. Of course we're more comfortable being on this side of the microphone, right?
Yeah, and us as interviewers, as documentary filmmakers, you forget sometimes the other person and how kind of they're really vulnerable,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you're asking them a lot to be interviewed and to you know be vulnerable for you and do that on camera, or in this case a podcast. So
Wow, wow. I mean, we're learning lessons here. That is like you couldn't have said it better, Faith. That's it's so true, right? Like we
yeah.
need this kind of reminder as journalists and as documentary filmmakers that yeah, you're right. It is super sensitive, the people that we're asking questions to, and boy, I guess now I'm up against it. So here we go.
Yeah. So just relax and enjoy. And I want to just say something to your audience,
Mm.
um, I, if I may.
No, this
Even
is
though
your audience today.
even well even I just want to speak to the person listening.
Hmm.
Even though I'm interviewing Chris, this is really about you and your journey, and you as a documentary filmmaker, and listening to Chris and hearing his experiences and his insights and learning from him and what he's learned all these years. So that's my goal for this interview, is to interview Chris, while also keeping in mind that this is for you. This is why Chris and I do what we do.
Hmm.
It's about helping other documentary filmmakers through their journey. And if we can help by sharing our stories and our experiences, then that's our goal. That's what we're trying to do. So
Amen.
with with that in mind, let's get going. And I'll try not to be too hard on you, Chris.
Oh boy.
So let's get started.
Yep.
I know that you are deep into your second season of your podcast.
Mm.
I just want to check in. How are things going so far?
It's going great. It's it's better than I. Well, I don't want to say it's better than I imagined, because I've always tried to imagine this being a show that a show where I could talk about my passion and share that passion with other people around the world who you and I know all have these passions, or a similar passion, and I just have a lot of gratitude for what's happened with the show, which started back in I don't know, May, June of 2016, and the feedback that I've gotten over this year plus, the enjoyment that I've had by doing the show, the people that I've met virtually, the people that I've met face to face, it's been pretty overwhelming, and I try to as much as I can, Faith, sort of keep it in front of me, and have gratitude for it, and know that there's even bigger and better things to come. But what has already happened so far has just been a tremendous thing in my life, and I'm really thankful for it, and I do believe that a lot of people are gaining by the existence of a show like the Documentary Life, including of course myself, but a lot of
Well,
other people as well.
let's go back a little bit.
Mm.
And why did you start the podcast? What was your intention? What was your thinking behind that?
Well, it's funny because when I first started, well, the idea of the podcast was really originally a blog, but I just wasn't consistent with it. And then I think I don't know, about a half year down the road, I realized that, or the idea of a podcast came up. And for whatever reason, that really, really excited me. And it's the kind of excitement that moves you to suddenly, like, you have a breakthrough. And at that time, I'd wanted to blog, but I wasn't blogging fairly regularly, even though I love to write. For whatever reason, the podcast was what moved me into, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it consistently. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with, I had a radio background, and I always enjoyed that. And I think, for years I fantasized about this idea of pirate radio. I loved the idea of just being able to share ideas and opinions and thoughts and on the air. And I think it's almost like my old radio world collided with my film world, and hence the podcast was born. And it really felt like the natural thing to do, and I haven't stopped since. And there, that's how it started.
Awesome. Yeah, and you've had a lot of great guests on so far, and I'm sure you're learning a ton.
I think that's been a big thing always with this show, is that while I'm certainly sharing my knowledge and experiences and teaching the world of documentary filmmaking, as well as sort of how to live a life as a documentary filmmaker, as much as I'm sharing and there's a teaching component to that, I feel like I'm soaking up so much knowledge myself. And so I'm getting an education this entire time. And really, the beauty of that is I feel like that's kind of fostering what I've wanted all along. And I feel like what you're doing with Desktop Documentaries, which is bringing this community of like-minded individuals, in our case, documentary filmmakers, together to learn all from each other. And so thereby creating this community of people who want to share with one another what they know, so we can all be better craft people for it, I guess.
Yeah, and actually what's so interesting about what we're doing, and one of the things that I do on Desktop Documentaries is I have courses for people to learn about various things in documentary filmmaking. And you know what? The act of me creating the course, I learned so much. And I just thought I should have a course where the assignment is for somebody to teach that same course.
Oh,
because,
wow.
because, when you have to figure it out to explain it to somebody else, you learn so much. And it's like the best way to learn is to teach someone else. And so I've been thinking about that, like, how can I kind of craft these courses to kind of turn it around and have people become teachers, to kind of teach somebody else. And in the process, they learn so much, so it's interesting. And that's why I know it's such a rich experience for you to do this podcast, because you're right. We're so busy, but you have to take the time to research these filmmakers, to learn about them, come up with good questions, and to really listen, and it's like in our busy lives, how often do we take the time to listen?
Oh man, right.
And when you really listen, you learn a lot. So you're not only doing a wonderful service to the documentary filmmaking community, but it's also, I'm sure, a very rich experience for you. So
yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to something that I know I have a passion for, and many documentary filmmakers have a passion for, and you have a passion for, and that is world travel.
Ah, yes.
And you have done a lot of it. And I just want to hear from you. You've been to many countries around the world, including Cambodia, Nepal, China, Haiti. Tell me how you ended up doing so much travel, and what was the purpose of those trips? Was that all filmmaking or what?
Well, it's that is a good question, and maybe listeners of the show probably in some way feel like they have an idea of what my answer might be. But the truth of the matter is, even as you're asking that now, I feel like I've actually not truly answered that, which is to say that, back when I had finished college, one of the first jobs I had was, and this is going to date me because this is back in 95, I went and spent a year teaching English overseas in South Korea. Now, if anybody has spent any time in Buffalo, New York, or Rochester, New York, they will quickly realize that it is a massive difference. And if they've spent any time in Asia, what a world of difference that is. And so for a 22-year-old to basically up and leave Buffalo, New York to go in, really at the time, honestly, Faith, I just was like, yeah, I need something different in my life. I've been living outside of this college town now for a while, and I don't know what in the hell I'm going to do with my degree. So I really got to get out of here and do something different. And so I answered a newspaper ad, again, that's going to date me, to go teach English overseas. And at this point, the post was in South Korea. So I spent a year doing this. And at that time, Faith, I had never traveled outside of the U.S. And so here I am. I'm 22. I've never been outside of the U.S. I've taken my first ever flight over, any sort of ocean. And,
Wow. Yeah.
And, of course, that flight was, I don't know, whatever it was, 15, 16 hours total. And suddenly I'm dropped in this place called South Korea. And I've barely lifted a pair of chopsticks, let alone, had Korean food at that point. And so to say it was a mind-blowing experience would be an understatement. Now, the interesting part of that, Faith, is that, there came a point in time, 9 months into that year-long contract, that I absolutely could not wait to get back home. And it wasn't because I didn't like South Korea or like South Korean culture, but it was so vastly different for me. And I think I was and I can see now in hindsight, I was in a I was a different person in many ways, and I was in a different space in my life. And so I wanted the comforts of home. I wanted to be around family and friends. And I, like I said, with 3 months to go, I had a calendar and I was checking the box every single day. Now, Faith, I wouldn't leave the country again. And that was, I guess I came back to the U.S. in 96. I wouldn't leave the country on a travel trip of any sorts until 9/11 happened. And there is a confluence of events there that spurred me into doing this. My point was, I didn't really value traveling. Wasn't a thing that I was really into. In the States, of course, I traveled. I road tripped a lot, and that was a big thing. But the idea of travel and experiencing other cultures, not that I was necessarily closed off to other cultures, but my heart hadn't really opened up to it, even having spent that year in South Korea.
Interesting.
It wasn't until around 9/11. It was shortly after 9/11 that I really started thinking about, ironically, travel again. And shortly after 9/11, ticket prices, as you know, went way down. And I was happily unemployed at that point, from my .com career. And was like, you know what? I need to have, there was another point in my life where I needed some kind of a change. And I just picked a place in the world, and at that point, of all places, I went to and spent a few weeks in the Czech Republic. And I did that, and that was when I first started to, that was when the idea of immersing oneself in other cultures started to kind of bleed into my life a bit more. That's when my heart started to open up, and it was about 2 or 3 years after that I first took my trip to Cambodia, where I was hired to work on a film called Bomb Hunters. And anybody who's listened to the show knows at that point, like the rest is history, if you will, because that's when my whole world completely opened up, and travel is now long since been one of the biggest passions in my life.
So forgive me for not knowing this this story. So real quick, for my benefit, did you not do filmmaking before that trip to Cambodia?
So My filmmaking at that point was not in documentary film at all. It was in narrative filmmaking, and I was not working in the industry at all. In fact, at that point, I'd been working in the hotel industry for a couple of years, and I was working on a digital feature, which I would end up, I ended up writing and directing and being in and blah 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 blah, doing that whole
Oh,
thing.
wow.
So it was like kind of like early on in the digital film world. I had a great, some great experiences doing it, but it was all really at that time. It was a passion and a hobby. I wasn't working in the film industry at all at that time. In fact, I guess you could say my first entrance into the film industry was being hired to go with this other documentary filmmaker to Cambodia that first time out.
And what was your job for that?
So I was essentially the sound guy on that. I was the sound engineer, and it really was a 3-person crew. It was Sky, the gentleman I was with. He was shooting, and then I was responsible for all sound. And then, of course, we had our fixer translator with us. So it was the three of us rolling around the Cambodian countryside for 6 months. And the experiences that I had there, it changed my life. It changed everything in my life. It changed the complete trajectory of my life. And I fell in love with documentary filmmaking, and I fell in love with that part of the world, which has since, been a part of my world ever since, really.
And that's when you came back and started your production company?
It isn't, actually. That's the thing. Like, there was even a gap there where, I came back, worked over there for 6 months. I came back, was hired to edit the film. So I spent probably another 6 months.
Wait.
Yeah,
you have no experience, and
I know.
This is the documentary life.
It
It's
is,
like
it is.
you cobble it together any way you can,
Well, no, and you're absolutely right, because there is a story here, and I'm sure I've talked about this in the program where, I'd been working on the film with Sky for about 3 months, and I had plenty of experience with Final Cut, was the software that we were using for editing at that point.
Okay.
I had plenty of experience sort of with Final Cut in that I'd done it a ton myself on the digital feature, and then a couple of short things that I'd done, right? So I felt comfortable with Final Cut, and yeah. So I had that bit of experience, and I made, instead of taking a week off, the 1 week that we got for a vacation during Christmas, I decided, I took it upon myself, and this is you're right, this is the documentary life, in that I decided, you know what, I'm going to leave, I need to do something that leaves this guy, Sky, with no choice but to hire me on it as his editor. Nobody's going to be more familiar with the footage than he and I, and at that time, part of my duties was also, it wasn't just sound, I was also responsible for working with the fixer translator to create this translation Bible. And so he's translating, and I'm working with him and doing transcripts of all footage, which was over 140 hours of footage. And so nobody's more intimate with what's happening in these interviews and what's happening in the story than I am, and Sky is. And so I have that on my side, and then I decide, you know what, I'm going to make a preview or a trailer of the film that we have so far. And I did, and I created this 4.5 minute piece for the film, and Sky was so impressed with it, and then it would actually be used to garner a Sundance grant and a State Department grant, and and I think, I like to believe that, my hard work and diligence and my passion with it was what would garner me the editing position after the film was shot.
Mm-hmm. And so you had a full-time job somewhere else, non-filmmaking at that moment?
Right. So then I came back and I swore to myself that, okay, that's it. I'm not going to get into I won't work in the service industry again. I have to find my way into film, because clearly, like, that was one of the most meaningful, easily, years of my life by far. And I felt like, well, this is my calling. This is my passion. I have to do everything in my power to work in this field. And guess what? Within 2-3 months of my last day working on Bomb Hunters, the edit, I was basically broke and in a position where I had no choice. And of course, I find myself doing whatever I need to do to make money. And so I ended up taking I was driving town car for a couple of months, and that was
Oh, wow.
yeah. So that was like connected with the hotel industry, right? I know after Bomb Hunters, it wouldn't be until after I came back from my second big Southeast Asia excursion that I would finally find my way into the film industry, working in commercials and some feature films, as how so many people start off in the industry, which is as a PA, as a production assistant. And it wasn't until then that I finally was able to start truly working in the film industry. Okay, hands up. Who here is living a documentary life? Would you say that you are? What does it mean to live a documentary life anyway? Well, we'll happily give you our definition. To us, living your documentary life means that you have crafted your lifestyle in a way such that you are able to make the documentary films you choose to make without it negatively impacting other aspects of your life, be that financial, your immediate relationships, or personal wellness. And furthermore, through the creation of your art, your existence is sustainable, creative, and fulfilling. Would you say this describes you? If not, is this something that you want for yourself? It was what we wanted for ourselves, and it took us quite a while to achieve it. Truthfully, there were many times we didn't think we'd make it at all. We were living in a world that was reactive rather than proactive, and it was costing us greatly. If any of this resonates with you, we'd like to help you find a better way. Because once we were able to honestly say we were living our documentary lives, we could look back and see what had gotten us there, and we knew we had to share it with others. We broke it all down and put it into Living Your Documentary Life, a program that helps you to craft your own lifestyle, relationships, and mindset in ways that empower you to make your best documentary films. You can find out more at thedocumentarylife.com/yourdoclife.
Something that's come up on Desktop Documentaries just in the last few weeks is this question of how do I make a full-time living as a documentary filmmaker?
Isn't that the question?
Yeah, and I don't know if you have figured it out. Have you? And if so, what are your secrets, your tips? What, if somebody like yourself who just falls in love with the idea of making documentary films, how do you balance that? How do you make a living and do this amazing thing of making documentaries?
Well, that in itself, that very question you have asked, is in many ways at the heart of what the documentary life is about and is interested in always exploring. I truly don't know many people personally who make their entire livings doing nothing but documentary films. I've mentioned even on the show, of course, these are huge names, and they could probably make their livings just doing docs, like Michael Moore or Errol Morris or Werner Herzog. Mm-hmm. But all of these guys also, a little bit on the side, do commercial work, which in itself should tell you something. I don't make my entire living by any means right now doing the documentary work. The majority of my income comes from doing the commercial and corporate video work. And so, but I'm in sort of a transformation in my life these days. And I'm really trying to make a focus almost exclusively on the documentary work, because I feel like I'm now at a place in my life, and both Steph, my wife, are in a place in our life where we're able to do things in our lives that are much more focused on the documentary work, because that's just what we've worked hard to get to. She came from a feature filmmaking world, and whereas I came more from the commercial world. And I'm sure that we'll continue to do some of that work, but even through our own business, Barong Films, we're no longer actively pushing or pursuing that kind of work as much as we're actively pushing and pursuing doing documentary work. Now, that
Wow.
does mean I'm sure I will continue doing the freelance work, whether as a camera op or as a director with documentaries, being as a hired hand. So say a director from London reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I heard good things about you. I need somebody to shoot a couple of weeks on my doc." Then that would be example of me being hired as a freelance camera op on somebody's doc. And so, but that's for me personally, right? But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but I also realize that the majority of us, like I said, we don't make our livings exclusively through documentary films. And so I would like to say that wherever you are at in your life, when you decide that I want to make a living being a filmmaker, well, you should absolutely begin doing that, but don't necessarily drop whatever it is that you're currently doing to make money, because there's so much value in bringing in income and the discipline that takes into
Yeah.
bringing in income in, and there's so much value in almost, I don't want to say being unhappy during that time, but I know that it fueled me, and it constantly fuels me to do better and to work harder, to make my dreams happen. I mean, I don't know if I really answered your question, but I just, yeah, I do. I guess I do think it's unrealistic to think you're going to make your living 100% as a filmmaker, right out of school or at age 18, or if you make a life change at 50, and decide tomorrow I'm going to be a filmmaker. Well, there's going to be a process there. It's not going to happen overnight. There is a process there. Be prepared and be ready for it, and embrace that process. Hell, document the process, right? Learn from
Yeah.
it, blog about it, set cameras upon yourself and roll film on it, and you never know how and when you might be able to share that, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think the words you don't often hear together is filmmaker and entrepreneur.
Oh man.
And and I think there's I think you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to have that entrepreneur mindset to make it as a filmmaker. If you're not going to work, full-time job, you can work at
Right.
a TV station or a PBS station or
Yep.
for a production company. You can be an employee. But if you want to make documentaries and be on your own, I think you have to have this gritty entrepreneurial mindset where nobody is telling you how to do it. You have to figure it out, and you've got to do what it takes,
Look, I mean,
to make it work.
you're nailing it, Faith, and I didn't. I was remiss to say that, so I'm glad that you brought that up. That's the dirty work, and that's the effort that's a huge part of what I'm talking about. And Faith, you've done it for years now with Desktop Documentaries. I've done it for over a year with the Documentary Life as the podcast. We know, as sort of, if you want to use the term social entrepreneurs, we know that in order to keep doing our podcast or to keep doing Desktop Documentaries, we have to constantly be out there and learning more and more, and pushing the envelope, and learning and using social media as much as we can, and really selling ourselves. And there's, you don't have to be slimy and greasy about it. There's that shouldn't be a dirty word. And I think it was, I came up through the school when the school of thinking that, when I wanted to really become a filmmaker, which I've wanted to really probably since I was about 20 years old. And I always thought, though, but hey man, you know what? I want to do films, but I'm not going to do Hollywood films, because I don't want to do the Hollywood thing. I don't want to get involved in that industry. I want to tell, there's more stories that need to be told. We don't all look like Brad Pitt or Jennifer Aniston. And those are the stories that I don't actually particularly want to be a part of. But there was a snobbiness that kind of went along with that, which was, I'm not going to do it the way the man does it, and I'm not going to do it the way that corporate America does it. And I know where that came from, and I am still embody a lot of that myself, but it hurt me in that I didn't think like I didn't think with a business sense.
Yes,
And
and
that's
you have
something
to.
I've
Yeah.
had to really, really learn. And I can't impress that enough upon filmmakers out there. And you can speak to this as well. And please do, Faith, that you have to be able to have some sort of business acumen. Otherwise, you're going to end up,
Yeah.
with your DVD on a bookshelf or your film sitting in a dark corner of a YouTube
Yep.
spot where nobody's able to get to it and nobody knows it exists. So
Yep.
if you
Yep.
want to be
Yep.
a filmmaker and you want to, or at least if you want to make any sort of money from filmmaking, you're going to have to learn how to be an entrepreneur.
I know. I'm telling you, when I was doing my documentary Briars in the Cotton Patch, I needed $50,000
Yeah.
to do distribution. Like I thought I was
Right.
done with the documentary. Like when it was like done edited, I'm like, phew, my work is done. It's like, oh crap, there's this thing called distribution. What the heck? Oh my God. And it's like I gotta raise another $50,000. How am I gonna how am I gonna do that?
Oh, that
Um,
exactly.
and well, I'll tell you, my father, well, he's passed away now, but he's the founder of Habitat for Humanity
Right.
International, and he raised billions of dollars. I mean, he was like a phenomenal fundraiser. And what made him so successful is he genuinely, in his heart, believed that he was doing people a favor by asking them for money, because he knows that people can have such joy by helping somebody else. Like you really feel good about yourself when you know you've made the world a better place. And
Oh
so he
man.
felt like he was giving people an opportunity to be blessed by asking them to fund this endeavor of helping build this house for a poor family who's suffering. And he knew by telling that story, by explaining the need, and if he could just convince people to give their money, they would be blessed for it. And so it was a completely
Wow.
different way of looking at fundraising, because I think a lot of us filmmakers look at fundraising as like we're begging for money and like, please, like, can you do me this favor? And
Right.
like, I'm so sorry. Like, can you give me $1? It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
whole wrong way of looking at it. Like
It's
you
so
shouldn't
self-defeating, right?
yeah, and you're not, and so you have to look at it as like people love to be part of a film project. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And so it's like you're giving people an opportunity, but it's finding people who resonate with what you're doing. And so a big going back to your question,
Yeah.
which was how did I raise this $50,000? Well, I was just like horrified at the idea of asking people for money. And I sent out a letter, and no money came back. I like sent out this fundraising letter,
Right.
and my dad said, Faith, you got to get on the phone. You make a list of 20 people that you feel would have an interest in this project. You've got to call them and explain to them what's going on and ask them for a donation.
Yeah.
And you've got to figure out, the hard part is figuring out how much to ask for, because you don't know what people make. But you've got to have an idea, and you've got to just say, can you donate $500?
Right.
Or can you donate $1,000 or whatever it is, but you've got to get on the phone with them, and they've got to really hear your voice, and you've got to make that pitch. And it's so brutally hard. I mean, really, really, it's like brutally hard, but you have to do it. And I did it, and raise the money. But I won't pretend it was easy. But you do have to have you have to have this mentality of they're your partner. You're not like, it's not like all on your shoulders. You have to look at them as a partner and treat them as a partner and just say, hey, I'm putting my life into this. I've put, hundreds and hundreds of hours. All I'm asking is just, for you to partner with me and to participate in this wonderful project to push forward this thing that we both believe in.
That's perfect. You absolutely nailed it, Faith. Thank you so much for saying that, because we've talked about that a little bit on the show. We had a guest, filmmaker Lydia B. Smith, and I think it was episode 4 or 5 or 6. And again, listeners can go back into the archive, and I encourage them to do that, because one of the things that she talks a lot about is this idea of getting right with money. And getting right with your perception of what money is, how it
Absolutely.
works, and ultimately doing really exactly what you have just said, which is find a way to realize that it's okay to ask for money, and more than that, that people will actually want to be approached. The right people will want to part with their money for the right project. And it's
Exactly.
important to realize exactly that. I'm so glad that you said that. And it's a big part of a mentality shift that I know a whole heck of a lot of us need to work on, and can be better at. And it's definitely something that Steph and I have been working on quite a bit the past couple of years. And it definitely does require a shift, but it really helps.
How can we build a country without identity, without memory, without a strong culture?
Well, let's transition to upcoming projects. And I want to know, what are you most excited about right now?
There's two things that I'm most excited about. Well, let's say three, and they are Elvis of Cambodia. I'm most excited about that because this is the first time since we lived in Cambodia for that 5-month period when we were filming, that we've been able to concentrate our efforts so fully and so passionately on the film.
It brings back to our childhood, to the beauty, the values of our life and culture during that time.
It's one of those things that over the past 3 years, we just haven't been able to get to an awful lot, and it's a heart-wrenching feeling knowing that you have this film project, this passion project that you've already put so much time and energy into, and that you love, and that you wish you could work on exclusively, and that you just don't ever get moments to put concentrated time upon. So that's one of the things that I'm most excited that we are doing now. So that would be Elvis of Cambodia.
Let me interrupt you briefly.
Sure.
Is that because you've had success with fundraising? You're able to put your focus on Elvis of Cambodia?
Right. It's in part fundraising, but it's also in part to this mind shift that we're talking about, because back in late March when we left the States and relocated to the UK, that was a big thing for us, and obviously, and one of the things that we knew that we wanted to do was be able to focus on our social entrepreneur endeavors, and as well as Elvis of Cambodia. And so, quite frankly, the selling of our house allowed us the space to be able to create this massive relocation, and afford us the opportunity to take some time to put our efforts and energy into nothing but our social entrepreneurships and Elvis of Cambodia. And so that has sort of bought us some time. Now, of course, we're still bringing in, we have other revenue streams that are happening at this time, and that helps afford us that opportunity for sure. But Faith, we have put in a ton of time and effort in the few years prior to be able to get to this position, to allow us to be here and allow us to have these other revenue streams happening, whether it be through selling of stock footage, whether it be through contracting out camera work, whether it be through this podcast. It's a number of avenues that are allowing us to be able to focus on some of these things. The biggest one, obviously, Elvis of Cambodia.
Yeah. And you nailed it. Just the multiple streams of income.
Yeah.
You can't just have one. Well, you can, but I think it's that entrepreneurial mindset.
Right. If we're not going to work for somebody else, then.
Yeah. You got to get real.
Real creative and real. Yeah.
And it is not easy. And
No.
It's years to figure it out.
I mean, this
really,
firsthand.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So back to the things you're most excited about. You said 2 or 3 things.
Yeah,
So
and
your first thing is Elvis of Cambodia.
right, and obviously this right here, the podcast, the documentary life, it's growing. Now it's growing exponentially, and I am so excited about what the show, I mentioned earlier. I'm so excited about what the show is offering my listeners as well as myself, and I just love being able to spend more and more time on the show and to be able to continue building out this audience and continue building out this network of like-minded individuals. Along with the Documentary Life podcast is these other things that are now branching off from it. And one of the things in particular is this workshop that I've been putting together, and it's a brainchild that I really had long before the podcast even. Is this idea of putting together a workshop, and I'd like to do it at least once, at least annually, if not biannually, have a workshop, a documentary filmmaking sort of how-to workshop in a country of choice. And this first one will be in Cambodia, since we'll be there filming Elvis of Cambodia. And basically it's going to be a how-to make documentary films in developing countries is basically going to be the main themes that we'll be working with through this workshop. And so the Documentary Life, the podcast, has really enabled me to kind of really be putting this workshop together. So I'm going to be excited to be announcing when that happens. So it's things like that the podcast has really allowed me to be able to do. Mm-hmm. So these are things that I feel I have a lot of gratitude and thankful that the podcast has enabled me to be able to do. So you can see that I'm very excited. That is one of the things that I'm also most excited about.
Very cool. How many people are you seeing for the workshop?
Well, most likely, and this could change, but most likely I think I'll probably cap the workshop at somewhere between 20 and 30 people. I don't want to make it much bigger than that, at least not the first time out, until I have I just want it to be as personal as possible. There will be other filmmakers there as part of this team. It won't be just myself or just myself and Steph. And so those filmmakers will be announced as the further along we get in this process. But I envision about 20 to 30 people being the max amount of people doing
Super cool.
Yeah.
Super cool.
It would be super awesome to have you be a part of the workshop, Faith. So
cool.
We should keep talking.
Let me tell you, Cambodia and Thailand are on my highest bucket list.
Well, there you go, as they should be. Excellent. This could be the opportunity.
Ah, man. And what are the dates?
Well, most likely, Faith, it's going to be around that time. We'll probably couple it when we're in Cambodia, finishing up Elvis of Cambodia. So, which will happen January, February, most likely.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep talking because...
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah. I would love to visit that part of the world.
Yeah.
I've been there. I've been to Malaysia, Japan, Philippines.
That's right.
South Korea,
I
India.
remember you saying that. Oh yeah. Oh.
But
well, then
never been to Cambodia or Thailand. So.
Well, and it's for me, it's not only a chance to impart sort of the how to, do documentary films in these countries, which include things like, how do you find and work with a fixer translator? What is transportation like? How do you get from point A to B? How do you work in a culture where the language, maybe English, is very little, if at all, spoken? I want people to know what it's like to work in these countries, in particular, maybe this first one, Cambodia, because it was such a entrance point for me, and it's such a game changer, I guess, in my life. It transformed me. My heart opened up to the Cambodian people, and it's where I fell in love with that part of the world. And if I can share that passion with other people, I have to believe that it's going to open hearts in the way it did for me. And so other people are going to be wanting to tell the stories in that part of the world or other developing countries,
we're going to wrap this up, and I'm
Cool.
going to ask you
All right.
the question that you ask everyone. What does the
man.
documentary life mean for you?
For me, how I live and lead my documentary life is I try to live it is in a way that whatever it is that allows me to work on my documentary films, and whatever it is that allows me to now do the documentary life as a podcast, that's how I live my documentary life. And how Steph and I are kind of living those lives, we have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, so that makes things challenging. But we kind of embrace it as a family, and so in particular, now Steph and I are creating our lives in a way that allows us to best embody this idea of a documentary life that we talk about all the time on the show. And in our way, we are doing it currently, in the UK, but we could, very well be doing it for a period of time in Cambodia, or we could certainly be going back to the States and doing it there. I think we're trying to build our lives in a way that wherever we live, we would be able to provide for our family. And that doesn't just mean financially. It also means provide sort of spiritually and artistically. Because if we're not fueling ourselves in other ways than financially, if we're not fueling ourselves artistically and spiritually, then we're not at all living the lives that we're trying to and want to live now. Faith, I guess that I would like to finish up by saying how much I appreciate having people like you, Faith, on the show, having all the guests that I've had on the show, and then the listeners that I believe are a part of this show as well. I cannot thank all of you enough, because I feel like without you guys, I'm not building this community that I really want to be building, or I'm just, I mentioned earlier the filmmaker having a film in the deep dark corners of YouTube where nobody can get to it. The show would be that, if not for people listening to it, and if not for having guests on the show, if not having someone like you, Faith, being on the show now. This is your second time. Without that, the show doesn't exist, and I am so grateful for it. And I guess I just really want to thank people for finding reason to continue to tune into the documentary life, and more than that, engaging with me and engaging with the community in a way that we all continue to share ideas. Because, as you know, Faith, we don't want it to be just Desktop Documentaries, and we don't want it to just be the documentary life where we're the only voices. We have to have it that we are trying to build it in a way that we have a lot of voices, because so many of us have things to share. It's definitely not just me. And as we mentioned earlier, I'm learning as much as I'm imparting all the time. It's a give and take for all of us. And for that, I have immense gratitude. Yeah, I mean, Faith, this has been a blast. It actually exceeded all expectations that I had with it. This was really cool.
Very cool. I think there was some excellent content that came out of this. So
yeah, this was really fun. I want to, do it again at some point in the year. I think it'd be cool. Like, if we have you on once or twice a year, it would just be, I think it would be really great, because I love having that shared conversation with somebody like yourself, Faith, because I feel like we have a lot of shared sort of, I don't want to say ideology, but you and I are certainly doing similar things on an entrepreneurship level, and I feel like you and I can share a lot there, but also just, I think you and I have passions for what we're doing, and it's always great to, I guess, be around that energy, and I for one really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, and it was an absolute blast to interview you. You did great, and really, it was fun to do.
Thank you again, Faith. I'm really excited for this. don't forget, if you're looking to live and lead a documentary life, you need to head over to thedocumentarylife.com/yourdoclife and take a look at our Living Your Documentary Life program. We'll help you craft your lifestyle so that you are able to make the documentary films that you want to make and live the doc life you want to live. Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.